Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, it's great to meet you. I'm Stella and I love making miniatures for my Barbie's dollhouse using mostly cardstock. Today I'm gonna show you how I made these miniature kitchen cabinets for my dolls, and as always I have free printable templates for you to download linked in the video. So now let's begin, shall we? To make the first unit of our miniature kitchen, we'll have to cut this part of the template twice, and then we'll glue the two layers together this way. As usual, I suggest using cardstock from old packaging for this, since it's quite thick and sturdy, but also very easy to cut and pretty much free, which, let's be honest, it's kinda great. The final piece should be about 1 millimeter thick, and we're gonna have to make 2 of these. Next, we're gonna cut this part 3 or 4 times, and once again we'll have to attach all the layers together to make a single panel that should be around 2 millimeters in thickness. Now, we're gonna repeat the exact same process for this part. And at this point we should have these 4 elements ready. Let's assemble them this way. Next we'll have to cut this part a bunch of times and then glue all the layers in 2 groups, both approximately 2 millimeters thick. Finally, we'll have to cut this part 3 or 4 times, and yet again we're gonna stack all the layers to get a final panel that's around 2 millimeters thick. We should end up with these 5 pieces. Now, usually my go-to method when making miniature furniture is to paint all the parts with a generous layer of acrylic gesso to kind of fake a wood grain-like texture. However, this time around I was going for a more lacquered finish, so instead I chose to cover all my pieces with a mix of copy paper and photo paper. I used copy paper to cover all the parts that will be on the inside of the cabinet, and photo paper for all the parts that are visible from the outside. I used a pack of Kodak photo paper because I find that it has just the right amount of glossiness for this purpose, and I'll have it linked in the description along with all the other supplies I used for this project in case you want to use the same one. We can now begin to assemble the base structure of our little kitchen cabinet. And as you can see, I left all the parts that will be hidden from the view uncovered, because, I mean, let's work smarter, not harder, am I right? With the base structure ready, we can start working on the drawers. First, we're gonna cut this part a few times, and then glue all the layers in 2 groups, each about 2 millimeters in thickness. Once again, we'll have to cover the panels with copy paper. Then we're gonna cut this and glue the 2 pieces to one side of each panel like this. And be careful when doing this, because one half is slightly taller than the other, and that's the one that goes on top. Next, we'll have to cut this part 3 or 4 times, glue all the layers together to get to a final piece that's around 2 millimeters in thickness, and finally cover it with copy paper. We're gonna repeat the same steps for this part. And for this one, and since this is going to be the front of the drawer, I covered it with photo paper instead of copy paper. Finally, let's cut this part, and for this one I suggest using a lightweight type of cardstock. We're gonna have to press it against a wet sponge to make it softer, then we'll roll it around a toothpick or a skewer to give it a bit of a rounded shape. Finally, we're gonna glue it to the top of the drawer's front panel, and I later realized I glued the handle to the wrong side of the panel. It should go on the shorter side, not on the longer one. At this point, we should have all these elements ready. Let's assemble them, leaving the front panel aside for just a second. We're gonna repeat the same process to make the 2 smaller drawers. We'll need 4 of these panels and 2 each of these ones. All the panels should be roughly 2 millimeters in thickness. Yet again, we're gonna assemble the inner part of the drawers, leaving the front panels aside. We're also gonna need 2 more handles. Next, we're gonna need a few skewers or toothpicks. I personally prefer skewers because they're a little bit longer than a toothpick. This will be the guides for our drawers. We'll simply have to glue them to the sides of each drawer using these little grooves as a placement guide. And I gotta admit, this is not super realistic, but I mean, it gets the job done. At this point, we can slide all the drawers in place. And finally, we can attach all the front panels to their corresponding drawer. I found that this is the easiest way to make sure that they are perfectly aligned with the outer structure and that there's enough space between them to let them open and close with ease. With the first unit ready, we can begin working on the second. Let's start by cutting this part 3 or 4 times, and as usual, we're gonna stack all the layers to get to a piece that's around 2 millimeters in thickness. Oh, and if you're using my free printable template, I would consider using a needle or an awl to pierce this little hole. On the other hand, if you have a Cricut or a Silhouette cutting machine, you can use my digital templates, which you can find in my shop linked in the description. Just as we did earlier, we're gonna cover the visible sides with copy and photo paper. And then we're gonna repeat the same process for this part and for this one, which we'll have to make twice. At this point, we can begin assembling the base structure of our second miniature cabinet this way. And when it's ready, we can attach it to the first unit. Next, we're gonna cut this part 5 or 6 times and stack all the layers together to get to a final piece that's roughly 3mm thick. Then we're gonna use a nail file to sand the front right corner to give it a slightly rounded shape, this way. We'll have to cover the front, back, and left sides with copy and photo paper. Then we'll cover the top and bottom edge with this part. And to make these corners rounded, we'll simply trim the paper in excess with a pair of small scissors. Finally, we'll have to cut this part and press it against a skewer to make a handle, which we'll then glue to the part we've just assembled. Next, we're gonna need a little piece of metal wire. Sewing pins will also work. We'll have to carefully slide the wire into the top and bottom edge of the door, using this little hole in the cover layer as a placement guide. And unless you're trying to give yourself a sort of finger piercing, you may want to use a pair of pliers, trust me on that. To place the door, we'll simply have to slide the wire into the hole in the cabinet's base, and then the top wire will go in the countertop, which we'll make in a minute. We can now move on to the next 2 units, which will host an oven and a dishwasher respectively. We're gonna need 1 each of these panels, then 3 of this one, and 4 of these. All panels should be roughly 2mm thick. When they're all ready, we can assemble them like this, leaving this panel aside for a second. Next, we're gonna cut this part 5 or 6 times, stack all the layers together to get to a thickness of around 3mm, and round the front bottom edge with a nail file. We'll have to cover the front, back, and top sides with copy and photo paper. Then we're gonna cut these strips and glue them to the left and right sides of the panel we've just assembled. Finally, we're gonna make this handle and glue it to the top part of the panel. Just as we did for the previous cabinet, we're gonna use a piece of wire to connect this little door to the cabinet's base structure. At this point, we can glue the last panel in place, and as a reference, it should sit at 9 cm from the top of the cabinet. Finally, we can connect these cabinets to the first 2, and in this moment, I had a bit of a change of mind and decided to coat all the handles with clear nail polish to make them look a little glossy. Next up is the sink, and my tried and true method for making miniature sinks is to use old plastic packaging. Just pick one that has the right size and shape and paint it either white or silver. If you don't have suitable packaging, don't worry, you can still make a small sink out of paper by cutting 2 or 3 rectangles like this and stacking them together. Then glue this strip around the edge of the rectangle, and finally all you have to do is paint and varnish it, similar to how we made the trays for this miniature IKEA cart. To make the sinks drain, let's cut this part into metallic cardstock. Mine is recycled from food packaging, but you can also find it on Amazon and in most craft stores. We're gonna glue the 2 sides together, and then we can add some details with a fine tip marker. We can make the overflow in the same way, and then we'll simply have to glue the drain and the overflow inside the sink. With the sink ready, we can begin working on the countertop. First, we're gonna cut this part a few times and stack all the layers together to get to a thickness of around 4mm. And of course, this hole right here has to match the sink's size and shape, so if you use the plastic box, you'll probably want to tweak the measurements a little bit. We're gonna repeat the same step for this part, and then we can attach the 2 pieces together this way. Next, we'll have to cut a bunch of these little rectangles, which we'll then glue one by one to the countertop. And maybe a bit weird, but I find this kind of thing so relaxing. Once all the little boards are glued in place, we can trim away the excess from the edges and the center cutout. Then, to give the surface a sort of wood grain-like texture, we're gonna have to cover it entirely with acrylic gesso applied with a brush. Finally, we're gonna paint it in a light brown shade. I personally like to use acrylic paint mixed with a bit of water because I find that this method really brings out the texture underneath. Once the paint has dried, I suggest placing the panel between two sheets of kitchen paper and then under something heavy for a few hours. This will straighten it, and also the kitchen paper will absorb all the humidity left in the paint, preventing the cardstock from bending over time. Finally, we can coat the countertop with a light layer of clear varnish to make it look slightly shiny. At this point, we can glue the sink to the countertop. And then we can attach the countertop to the cabinets, this way. Next, we're gonna cut this part 4 times and attach the layers in 2 groups. We'll have to cover the resulting 2 panels with copy paper. And then we can glue them to the back of our cabinets like this. Once the glue has dried, we can paint this top edge in the same color as the countertop. To make a faucet, we're gonna start by cutting these 4 parts and then we'll glue them together, going from the biggest to the smallest. We'll have to repeat the exact same step for these parts. And finally, we're gonna assemble the 2 pieces together this way. To smooth out the edges, we can use a tiny bit of spackling paste or 3D paint. This will make the faucet look a little more rounded. And the final piece should be about 4 mm in thickness. Next, we're gonna cut this strip into copy paper and glue it around the faucet's base this way. We're gonna repeat the same process for this strip that will attach to the opposite end of the faucet. Then we're gonna cut this part 2 or 3 times, glue all the layers together, and finally attach the resulting piece to the faucet's base. Next, we'll have to cut this long strip of paper and roll it around a toothpick, adding glue as we go. Then we're gonna cut this shorter strip and wrap it around the little cylinder we've just prepared, gluing the 2 ends together to form a tiny ring. Then we're gonna cut this little rectangle, press it against a wet sponge to make it more malleable, and finally we'll glue it around a little paper ring this way. Next, we'll have to cut this part and glue it to the ring like this. Finally, we can attach this piece to the rest of the faucet. And once again, we can use spackle to fill any eventual gap. At this point, we can paint the faucet to make it look like it's made of steel, and it's better if you keep this part separate from the rest while painting, otherwise it might get stuck and you won't be able to turn it. Once the paint has dried, we can attach the faucet to the countertop. And the first part of our miniature paper kitchen is ready. Stay tuned because I have a lot more projects coming your way. As promised, here's a link to the free printable template, and if you want to start working on a fridge for your dollhouse kitchen, you should totally watch this video next. And this is all for today. Until next time, bye!